And so I love that. One thing I wanted to ask you about, Kirby, is how do you deal, because I know you've seen this, my friend, how do you deal with people who they have all these thoughts and emotions about what happened, and they ruminate on how amazing the experience was, right? So they keep going back to the experience. And then as a result, they either do it more or they try different medicines, and that's just what they do, right? How do you approach people who it's like, well, you've had all these amazing experiences and you keep talking about them. Um, at the end of the day, you have to ask them, like, where do you get to a point where it's like, when is your behavior actually going to change? Like, you're learning all these new things, but as in anything in reality, you can't just think them and will them to being true. You actually have to change your behavior. So where do you see you struggle with people there? Like, how do you know people are kind of in that rut? And do you have any strategies or tools to get out of them with people when you're integrating with them? Because like you might see the same people all the time, and they still are cynical about the world, or they're cynical about how they who they are. They'll never be a leader. They'll never be X. They'll never be Y. But yet they have these amazing experiences, right? So how do you deal with that personally as an integration coach?
Yeah, it's not uncommon. I mean, again, it to me, if you showed up for a weekend ceremony, the community, the connection, the energy, the space, the vibe, it's attractive, right? So wanting to step out of the matrix for just a weekend and step into a space where you've got shared understanding, normalization of the experience, validation and empathy, the reduction of isolation, celebrating growth, all these things that are happening in this space together, which is the importance of community, which we can get into. Most folks don't have a community. So what happens is these ceremony weekends start becoming your ceremony, your community. And I was one of those, right? And then you start becoming known. So then there's some egoic pieces like, hey, Kirby's back, right? So now it's like, yeah, I've been doing this before. I'm not new to this experience, right? So now you feel like somebody in that space. So people are finding these spaces to substitute community. And I understand it, right? Because again, we talk about like this normalization of experience and the validation and empathy that sometimes you're not going to get outside the space. So for those folks, I mean, you almost answered the own question. It's how can you integrate that experience with them and show them that is what's happening? It's like, yeah, the experience was great. What are we doing with this? If we're just having these experiences, we're not honoring the medicine the way that we should, right? And to me, the game from my standpoint is it's like a lot of medicine. Like, how do you use the minimum amount of medicine to get the maximum result? Well, that's going to take some level of integration. So it's soft to your answer. How do I work with that softly? Because I understand that these folks are also showing up for community, and for some folks, this is the only community that they have. So you also don't want to pull that from them or make them feel that there's something wrong with them for wanting to continue to show up. But you do have to have those conversations.
Yeah.
Because at some stage it's diminishing results, right? And Aya finally told me that, and that sounds wild to people. It's like the wooiness of it. But my last ceremony, she was like, "What are we doing here?" And I was like, "I don't know." She's like, "I've pretty much told you what you need to know. Are you implementing it? Are you doing anything with it? Have you put it all into play? Have you mastered that yet? So hang up the phone, right? The information's already been given, so hang up the phone." So it's just having that conversation with folks, and potentially from us as a church and a community is trying to offer them another way of having community. It's like, well, maybe volunteering would make some more sense for you. Maybe you could help us out with this event so you can still be a part of this, but not having to necessarily participate in the psychedelic aspect of it because it may not be needed.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing I struggle with when I hear about people who have done these things is, they're like, I found my people, right? So they'll go to Burning Man or they'll go to Costa Rica, and it's all just love and light. And they're like, these people get me. Well, of course they're gonna get you. You all just did this heavy dose of medicine and you're exploring what you saw. Like, that's not the work. The hardest work of all is integrating that stuff into your lived experience with a stranger who's standing in front of you at the gas station. Your parents who all of a sudden notice that you're not as concerned about political divides anymore. Like, what's that about? They may never understand your experience, but you could say, I decided to make a change on how I perceive the world and actually change my reality. And people are reflecting that reality back at me in a better way because I changed. Simple as that. But
Yeah.
that's what I struggle with is like, and you could use it's not always easy to pick up, but people who just they basically have very low expectations for any random people that they go out and see. It's the weirdest thing. And so they set this arbitrary baseline for who they think this person should be. Oh, they should be as open as possible because if they're as evolved as I am, and they've had an experience like they, of course. Um, and that's where you get into trouble. Again, there's a lot of places you get into trouble, but I appreciate you saying that.